My wife slept with my best friend. One quiet night triggered a reckoning, exposing every lie, allowing me to reclaim my home and dignity. There's a certain kind of quiet that only settles into a house after the sun goes down. It's not silence. It's the gentle hum of the refrigerator, the faint ticking of a clock in the hallway, the sound of a home breathing. For 5 years, that sound was my sanctuary. My wife and we bought this place when I was 30. It was our biggest accomplishment. We poured everything into it, our savings, our weekends, our arguments over paint colors. It wasn't just a structure of wood and drywall. It was the foundation of our life together. At 35, I thought that foundation was rock solid. I thought the quiet hum of my house was the sound of peace of stability. I had no idea it was the calm before a storm that would tear everything apart. That night started like any other Tuesday. I was on the couch scrolling through my phone, half watching some documentary about deep-sea exploration. My wife, who's 34, was in the kitchen getting a glass of water. The air was comfortable, familiar. It was the predictable rhythm of a life I had built, and I thought a life I understood. And then a knock on the door shattered the quiet. Not a gentle tap, but a heavy, almost desperate-sounding knock. It was late enough to be unusual, but not so late that it was alarming. I figured it was a package delivered to the wrong address, or maybe a neighbor needing to borrow some sugar. I was wrong. It was so much worse. I opened the door and my friend Cooper Bailey was standing on my porch. Cooper is my age, 35, and we'd been friends for years. But the man on my doorstep looked like a wreck. His face was pale and sweaty, his hair was a mess, and he was hunched over, clutching his stomach like he'd just run a marathon he hadn't trained for. He looked, for all intents and purposes, incredibly sick. My first instinct was pure concern. This was my friend. "Cooper, man, what's wrong?" "Are you okay?" I asked, stepping aside to let him in. He stumbled past me, barely making it to the armchair in the living room before collapsing into it with a groan. "Charles, man, I'm so sorry to just show up like this," he mumbled, his voice raspy. "I started feeling awful at work. I tried to drive home, but I don't know, I got dizzy. I was just a few blocks away, and I knew I couldn't make it all the way back to my place. I feel like I'm going to pass out." My wife came in from the kitchen, her glass of water paused halfway to her lips. "Oh my God, Cooper, what happened?" Now let me be clear. Cooper Bailey was a good friend. If he was sick, my home was his home. I had no issue with him being there, needing a place to crash until he felt better. That's what friends do. I immediately went into problem-solving mode. "Okay, buddy, just relax. You want some water, ginger ale? I think we have some crackers or something." I put my hand on his shoulder. "Have you called Haley? Does she know where you are?" Haley Adams is Cooper's wife. She's also 35. They were a package deal, and the four of us had spent countless weekends together doing barbecues and game nights. It seemed like the most logical first step. "Your husband is sick, you should probably know about it." Cooper waved a dismissive hand, his eyes squeezed shut. No, don't bother her. She's got a huge presentation for work tomorrow morning. She's been stressing about it for weeks. I don't want to worry her. I just need to lie down for a bit. An hour or two maybe, until this passes." It sounded reasonable enough. A little strange maybe. I know if I were that sick, the first person I'd want to call would be my wife, but hey, every relationship is different. I was about to offer him the guest room, or at the very least a pillow and a blanket for the couch, when my wife stepped in, and that's when the whole night started to feel wrong. The air in the room shifted. The comfortable, familiar hum of my home was replaced by a high-pitched, invisible static of unease. My wife's concern wasn't normal. It was dialed up to 11. She completely bypassed me, rushing over to Cooper's side like she was a paramedic and he was a critical patient. She knelt down in front of him, her voice dropping to this soft, syrupy coo that I hadn't heard her use in years. "Oh, you poor thing. You look terrible. Let me feel your head." She placed the back of her hand on his forehead, letting it linger there for just a second too long. It was a gesture that felt intimate, too intimate for the situation. I've seen her check my temperature when I've had the flu. It was a quick clinical tap. This was different. This was a caress. I felt a small, weird knot tighten in my stomach. I told myself I was being ridiculous. My friend is sick, my wife is being nice. What's the problem? But it kept getting weirder. She started fluttering around him, a whirlwind of anxious energy. "You can't just sit there," she declared. "You need to lie down properly. Charles, get him some water." "No, wait. Let me make you some tea. Peppermint tea is good for an upset stomach." And we need to get you some blankets. Are you cold? You feel a little warm. She was talking a mile a minute, not really waiting for an answer to any of her questions. I just stood there frozen in the middle of my own living room, feeling like a stranger. I'd had a nasty stomach bug just a few months prior, and my wife's response had been to leave a bottle of Gatorade in a bucket by the bed before closing the door. For Cooper, she was acting like Florence Nightingale herself. I was just about to offer him the couch, I said, trying to reinsert myself into the situation. We can get him set up right here. She shot me a look. It was a quick, sharp, annoyed glance. The kind of look you give someone who's just stated the stupidest, most obvious thing in the world. The sofa, Charles, don't be ridiculous. He's sick. He can't sleep on a sofa. He needs a proper bed. The knot in my stomach tightened again. A little harder this time. I could feel a faint alarm bell starting to ring in the back of my mind. The logic wasn't tracking. The guest room bed was perfectly fine. It was a comfortable queen-size mattress we bought specifically for when family stayed over. Okay, I said, slowly testing the waters. The guest room it is then. I'll go get the sheets. I turned to head down the hall, but her voice stopped me dead in my tracks. No, not the guest room. I turned back around. She was still kneeling by Cooper's chair, but she was looking right at me. And there was a look in her eye I'd never seen before. It was defiant, demanding. The guest room mattress is too firm, she said, her voice leaving no room for argument. It won't be comfortable for him when he feels like this. He needs to be properly comfortable so he can recover. I just stared at her, completely baffled. Cooper, for his part, was just sitting there with his eyes closed occasionally, letting out a soft groan that in this new strange context was starting to sound a little theatrical. The whole scene felt like a play that I'd been dropped into without a script. I didn't understand my lines. I didn't even understand my character's motivation anymore. What are you talking about? I asked, and my voice came out flatter than I intended. The mattress is fine. Your mother slept on it for a week last Christmas and said it was wonderful. She stood up, brushing off her knees. She crossed her arms and fixed me with that same hard, unreadable stare. My mother wasn't doubled over in pain, Charles. It's not the same thing. He needs the best we have. And that's when the first truly massive red flag went up. It was no longer a small bell in the back of my mind. It was a full-blown fire alarm, sirens, blaring lights flashing. There was only one other bed in the house. Our bed, the bed my wife and I shared. The bed we had picked out together 5 years ago, right after we bought the house. It was the most private, most sacred space in our home. And I stood there watching her as the horrifying, unbelievable implication of her words slowly dawned on me. There was no way. She couldn't possibly be suggesting what I thought she was suggesting. It was insane. It was unthinkable. But the look on her face told me that not only was she thinking it, she had already decided. And in that moment, in the quiet of my own living room, I felt the solid ground beneath my feet begin to crumble. My wife just stood there, arms crossed, with this look on her face that was equal parts stone and steel. The silence in the room stretched out, getting thinner and thinner until I thought it would snap. All I could hear was the hum of the refrigerator from the kitchen and the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. I was waiting for her to laugh, to shake her head and say, "Of course not, you idiot. What do you think I am?" And then the world would click back into place. But she didn't. She just kept looking at me, her expression unwavering. And in that cold, hard stare, I saw the truth. She wasn't suggesting it. She was telling me. "He can have our bed," she said. And the words came out so calmly, so matter-of-factly, that they felt like a physical blow. "It's the best one. He'll be able to rest there properly." I think I actually laughed. It was a short, sharp, incredulous bark of a sound. "Our bed? You want me to give my friend? Our marital bed?" "He's your friend Charles," she said, her voice taking on a sharp, scolding edge. "And he's sick. What's the big deal?" "It's a place to sleep." "What's the big deal?" I repeated, my own voice rising in volume. I couldn't help it. It felt like my brain was short-circuiting. "It's not just a place to sleep. It's our asterisk bed. It's where you and I sleep. It's our space. You don't just give it away to someone else for the night." From the armchair, Cooper let out another low-pain moan. It was a perfectly timed sound of misery that made me look like a complete monster for arguing. My wife's eyes darted towards him, her face softening with a wave of concern, and then they snapped back to me hard as flint. "He is in pain," she hissed, keeping her voice low. "Can you please lower your voice, and for once in your life, can you think about someone other than yourself? This is about helping a friend in need. It's called compassion, empathy. Maybe you've heard of those things. I felt the blood rush to my face. The sheer audacity of her words, the way she was twisting this, turning me into the selfish, uncaring villain was breathtaking. This was my house. That was my bed. A bed that was more than just a piece of furniture. It was a symbol. We bought it together, a 35-year-old man and a 34-year-old woman, a major purchase for the house we just bought 5 years earlier. We had spent a whole Saturday testing out mattresses, laughing as we flopped onto them in the showroom. We'd had arguments in that bed and made up in that bed. We'd had quiet Sunday mornings with coffee and whispered secrets in the dark. It was the anchor point of our marriage, the one truly private sanctuary we had in the entire world. And she was talking about it like it was a cot at a summer camp she could just assign to whoever she wanted. This has nothing to do with compassion, I said, trying to keep my voice even, trying to appeal to a logic that I was quickly realizing had left the building. We have a guest room, a perfectly good, comfortable guest room that my own father slept in for 3 nights last month. Why isn't that good enough for Cooper? I already told you she snapped, her patience clearly gone. The mattress is too firm. It's not good for him. He needs softness. He needs comfort. Why are you making this so difficult? I'm making this difficult. I was gesturing around the room now, feeling a frantic energy bubble up inside me. You're the one who is suggesting something completely and totally insane. You don't put another man in your marital bed. You just don't. It's a line. It's the biggest line there is. Cooper shifted in the chair, cradling his stomach. Guys, please, he mumbled, his voice weak and raspy. Don't fight because of me. It's okay. I can just sleep here, in the chair. It's fine. It was a brilliant move. He was the noble sufferer, the poor sick soul just trying not to be a burden, while I was the cruel territorial husband making a scene. My wife's face instantly melted into a puddle of sympathy for him. Oh, Cooper, no, she said, rushing back to his side and putting a hand on his shoulder. Don't be silly. You will not be sleeping in a chair. You're going to a proper bed where you can stretch out and get some real rest. She straightened up and looked directly at me, her eyes daring me to object. End of discussion. And that was it. The finality in her tone was absolute. It wasn't a negotiation. It was a verdict. She had made a unilateral decision about the most intimate space in our marriage, and I was expected to just fall in line. I just stood there speechless. My mind was racing, trying to find the words, the argument, the magic phrase that would make her see how profoundly wrong this was. But there was nothing. It was like arguing with a brick wall that thought I was the most selfish person on the planet. She walked past me, deliberately not making eye contact, and headed down the hallway toward our bedroom. I heard her open the door. I heard the rustle of sheets being pulled back. Every sound was a fresh stab of disbelief. She was actually doing it. She was preparing my bed for another man. I turned and looked at Cooper. He had his head tilted back against the chair, his eyes shut. He looked pale under the living room lights, but I was starting to see past the performance. The occasional perfectly timed groan, the refusal to make eye contact with me, the way he was letting my wife fight his battles for him. This wasn't a friend in need. This was an invader, and my wife was his willing accomplice, holding the gates open for him. She came back into the room a minute later. Okay, she said, her voice soft and gentle, directed entirely at Cooper. It's all ready for you. Do you think you can make it down the hall? I think so, he whispered, and began the slow, arduous process of getting to his feet, leaning heavily on the arm of the chair, his face a mask of agony. It was a convincing performance, I had to give him that. He looked like a wounded soldier on a battlefield. My wife hovered by his side, her hands fluttering near his back, ready to catch him if he stumbled. Easy does it, she cooed. Just lean on me if you need to. They began the slow shuffle down the hallway. My wife and my supposed best friend heading toward my bedroom. My bedroom. I watched them go, a cold, heavy feeling settling in the pit of my stomach. It wasn't just anger anymore. It was a deeper, more profound sense of violation. It felt like I was watching a home invasion happening in slow motion, and one of the intruders was my own wife. I heard the bedroom door click shut. I stood alone in the living room for what felt like an eternity. The silence was deafening now. The house, my house, which had felt like my sanctuary just an hour ago, now felt alien and hostile. I was in exile in my own home. After a few minutes, the bedroom door opened again and my wife came out, closing it softly behind her. She walked back into the living room and finally looked at me. Her expression wasn't angry anymore. It was just tired, annoyed, like I was a problem that needed to be managed. "He's settled," she said quietly. I got him a glass of water and put the trash can by the bed just in case. I didn't say anything. I just stared at her. She sighed a long, put-upon exhalation. "Look, Charles, I know you're not happy about this." "Not happy," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Yeah, you could say that. You could also say the Grand Canyon is a ditch." "It's for one night," she said, waving a dismissive hand. "He'll probably be gone by morning." "It's not a big deal. You're being dramatic." There it was again. I was the one with the problem. I was the one who was overreacting. The slow, creeping feeling of being gaslit was starting to make my skin crawl. She walked over to the linen closet at the end of the hall and pulled out a pillow and a folded-up blanket. She walked back and tossed them onto the sofa where I was apparently expected to sleep. There she said, her voice devoid of any warmth or apology. "You'll be fine here for one night. Try to get some sleep." And with that, she turned and walked away. Not to our bedroom, of course. That was occupied. She went into the guest room, the room with the perfectly good bed that was apparently a torture device for a sick friend, but perfectly acceptable for the wife of the man she just kicked out of his own bed. She closed the door behind her without a backward glance. I was left alone again, standing in the middle of the living room. The pillow and blanket sat on the sofa like an insult. This was my punishment for not being compassionate enough, for not willingly surrendering the most sacred space in my marriage to another man. My reward was a lumpy sofa and a threadbare blanket. I walked over and picked up the pillow. It was one of the cheap ones we kept for guests. I sank down onto the sofa, the springs groaning in protest. I didn't bother unfolding the blanket. I just sat there in the dark, staring at the blank television screen. The knot in my stomach was now a solid block of ice. The alarm bells were gone, replaced by a cold, chilling certainty. This wasn't about a sick friend. This wasn't about a firm mattress. This was about disrespect, a profound, fundamental lack of respect for me, for our marriage, and for our home. She had chosen him over me. She had prioritized his alleged comfort over my feelings, my boundaries, and our shared life. She didn't just ask me to sleep on the sofa. She ordered me to. She had unilaterally revoked my access to my own life and handed the keys to someone else. And as I sat there, the humiliation burning in my chest, I knew one thing for sure. I was not going to be a passive victim in my own home. This was not the end of the discussion. Not by a long shot. I sat on that lumpy sofa for a long, long time. An hour passed, maybe more. Time seemed to stretch and warp in the oppressive silence of my own home. Every tick of the clock on the wall felt like a hammer blow, counting down the seconds of my humiliation. I thought about the last 5 years. My wife and I had spent 5 years building a life in this house. We'd picked out the paint colors together, argued over furniture, planted the garden in the back. This house, this bed, they weren't just things. They were symbols of our partnership, our shared space. And tonight, she had given that symbol to another man, relegating me to a cheap guest pillow. The more I thought about it, the less sense it made. Cooper Bailey was 35 years old. He had a wife, Haley Adams. He had his own home, not more than a 15-minute drive from here. If he was truly so sick that he couldn't make it home, why didn't he call Haley? Why didn't my wife call Haley? A man is that ill, and the first person you think to call isn't his own wife. No, it didn't add up. The pieces didn't fit. The story was full of holes. That's when the cold certainty I'd felt earlier began to sharpen into a weapon. The feeling of being a victim started to curdle and transform into something else. It became a cold, hard resolve. I wasn't just going to sit here and absorb this disrespect. I wasn't going to wake up in the morning and pretend everything was okay for the sake of a quiet life. A boundary had been crossed that could never be uncrossed. My wife and my so-called friend had made a choice. Now I was going to make mine. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. My thumb hovered over the contacts list. This was the point of no return. I knew that making this call would detonate a bomb in the middle of my life. It would shatter my marriage, destroy a friendship, and create a crater so deep I might never climb out. But the alternative, to do nothing, to accept this, to sleep on this sofa while that man slept in the room next to my wife, was 1,000 times worse. It was a kind of death. I found Haley Adams' name. I remembered getting her number a few years ago when we were all planning a surprise party for Cooper. It felt like a lifetime ago. I took a deep breath, held it, and pressed the call button. It rang once, twice. I almost hung up. Then a sleepy, slightly annoyed voice answered. "Hello." Haley, I said, keeping my voice as level and calm as I possibly could. It's Charles Long. I am so sorry to be calling you this late. There was a pause. I could hear her shifting in bed. Charles, is everything okay? Is Cooper with you? He is, I said, and the performance of my life began. I injected a note of slight confusion and concern into my voice. That's why I'm calling. He showed up here about 3 hours ago, saying he was feeling really sick. My wife was worried about him driving, so she insisted he stay the night here. I paused, letting the words hang in the air. He's sleeping in our bed. I just wanted to make sure you knew where he was and that he was okay. I figured you'd be worried. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was a heavy-loaded silence that stretched for what felt like a full minute. It wasn't the silence of a wife processing concern for her sick husband. It was the silence of a wife processing a lie. I knew in that moment that whatever story Cooper had told her about his whereabouts tonight, it wasn't that he was sick at his friend's house. When she finally spoke, her voice was completely different. The sleepiness was gone, replaced by something sharp and cold and dangerous. He's where? He's here, I repeated calmly. In my bed. I'll be there in 15 minutes, she said, and the line went dead. I lowered the phone and placed it on the coffee table. The trap was set. All I had to do now was wait. I didn't feel angry anymore. I didn't even feel hurt. I just felt empty. I was a spectator now, waiting for the curtain to rise on the final act of my marriage. It was almost exactly 20 minutes later when headlights swept across my living room windows. A car door slammed shut with enough force to rattle the glass. I didn't get up. I just sat there on the sofa waiting. A few seconds later, there was a furious pounding on the front door. It wasn't the knock of a guest. It was the summons of an executioner. I stood up, walked to the door, and opened it. Haley Adams stood on my doorstep, but she was not the woman I knew from barbecues and holiday parties. Her face was a mask of cold fury. Her eyes were like chips of ice. She didn't say a word to me. She just pushed past me, her gaze sweeping the empty living room before locking onto the closed door of my master bedroom. The noise of her arrival had done its job. Just as Haley started walking towards the bedroom, the door to the guest room opened and my wife stepped out, a confused and annoyed look on her face. "What is all that noise?" she started to say, but her words died in her throat when she saw Haley. At the exact same moment, the master bedroom door opened, and there stood Cooper Bailey. He wasn't pale, he wasn't sweating, he wasn't doubled over in pain. He was just standing there in his t-shirt and boxers, looking rumpled and sleepy. He looked from my wife to me and then to Haley. The color drained from his face so fast it was like watching a ghost appear. All four of us stood there for a heartbeat, frozen in a tableau of absolute disaster. Haley broke the silence. Her voice was low and shaking with rage. "Working late, Cooper? Is that what you call this, working late?" Cooper stammered, his eyes wide with panic. "Haley, what? What are you doing here? I wasn't feeling well." "Oh, you weren't feeling well?" Haley shot back, taking a step towards him. "You felt fine enough to tell me you had a deadline. You had to pull an all-nighter for funny. You don't look like you're at the office." My wife, bless her heart, decided this was the moment to try and play the hero. She stepped between them, her hands up, placatingly. "Haley, calm down. He's sick. I was just taking care of him. You're making a scene." Haley turned her head slowly to face my wife. The look she gave her could have frozen fire. You have a lot of nerve talking to me about making a scene. In your house, with my husband, in your bed." She spat the word bed like it was poison. "Where's your husband, huh? Where's Charles in all this?" As if on cue, all three of them turned to look at me. I was still standing by the front door, just watching. I hadn't moved a muscle. I just gave a small, sad little wave. The argument exploded. It was a hurricane of accusations and pathetic denials. Cooper kept insisting he was sick. Haley kept calling him a liar. My wife kept trying to act as the compassionate caregiver, insisting everyone was overreacting. But the lies were too thin, the story too ridiculous. The whole flimsy excuse of his illness crumbled to dust under the white-hot glare of Haley's fury. In the middle of it all, with the screaming and the crying and the finger-pointing, the final ugly truth was laid bare. This wasn't the first time. Haley started listing off other late nights at work, other guys' trips that sounded suspicious. It became sickeningly clear that this wasn't some spontaneous moment of weakness. This was a pattern, and my wife wasn't just some innocent bystander. She was a willing participant. Her over-the-top concern for Cooper, her dismissal of my feelings, her insistence on using our bed, it all clicked into place. It was a power move, a blatant, calculated act of disrespect to me and to our marriage. I had heard enough. Enough! My voice cut through the chaos like a blade. It wasn't a yell, but it was filled with so much cold authority that all three of them stopped dead and stared at me. The house fell completely silent. I walked slowly into the center of the living room, the eye of the storm. I looked at Cooper first. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He just stared at the floor like a guilty child. "Cooper," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "get your clothes, get your shoes, and get out of my house." He looked up shocked. "Charles, man, I can explain." "There is nothing to explain." I cut him off. "You have 5 minutes to get your things and be off my property, or I'm calling the police." Then I turned to my wife. She was staring at me, her mouth hanging open in disbelief. "Charles, you can't be serious." "I have never been more serious in my life," I said, looking right into her eyes. The woman I thought I knew was gone, replaced by a stranger. "You made your choice. You chose his comfort over our marriage. You chose to lie. You chose to disrespect me in my own home. Now you can live with that choice. Pack a bag. You're leaving too." Tears started streaming down her face. "You can't kick me out. This is my house too." "You are correct," I said, nodding slowly. "And as a co-owner, in the middle of a hostile domestic situation that you and your friend created, I am ordering you to vacate the premises until we can get lawyers involved. For tonight, you are gone." Finally, I looked at Haley. Her face was pale and tear-streaked, her anger replaced by a shattered exhaustion. "Haley," I said, my voice softening just a fraction, "I am truly sorry that you were dragged into this mess, but this is over now. I need you to leave too." She just nodded numbly, too broken to argue. The next 10 minutes were a blur of frantic, silent activity. Cooper scrambled into the bedroom, emerging a minute later, fully dressed, grabbing his keys without a word, and practically running out the front door. My wife, sobbing hysterically, threw some things into an overnight bag, shooting me looks of pure hatred the entire time. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Haley was the last to go. She paused at the door and looked at me, her eyes empty. "Thank you, Charles," she whispered, "for telling me." I just nodded. "Take care of yourself, Haley." And then she was gone. The door clicked shut, and I was alone. The silence that fell over the house was absolute. But it wasn't the hostile, oppressive silence from before. This was a clean silence, a peaceful silence. I stood there in the middle of my living room for a long time, just breathing. Then I walked into my bedroom. My bedroom. The air was thick with the smell of my wife's perfume and Cooper's cologne. The bed sheets were a rumpled mess. Without a moment's hesitation, I walked over to the bed and began to strip it. I pulled off the comforter, the top sheet, the fitted sheet, the pillowcases. I balled it all up, carried it into the kitchen, and stuffed it into a heavy-duty trash bag. I tied the top tight and dragged it out to the garage. I went back to the bedroom and stood in the doorway looking at the bare mattress. The marriage was over. My friendship with Cooper was a smoking crater. My life as I knew it had been completely demolished in the span of 4 hours. And yet, I didn't feel devastated. I didn't feel broken. I felt free. I had been tested. I had been pushed to the absolute limit of disrespect a person can endure. And I didn't break. I didn't crumble. I took back control. I purged the deception from my home. I reclaimed my space, my dignity, and my self-respect. I walked over, opened the windows to let the cool night air in, and then I went to the linen closet. I pulled out a fresh set of my own sheets. As I made the bed, my bed in my quiet, empty house, I knew the road ahead would be difficult. But for the first time all night, I knew with absolute certainty that I was going to be okay.